America is home to 33 million small businesses, the beating heart of communities across the country.
And proof that the American dream is still alive.
This is a show about those dreamers and doers and the communities they serve.
Their real life stories.
Their struggles and successes.
Their grit, determination, and passion.
And the people who fight
to keep their American dream alive.
I'm Alfredo Ortiz.
I'm Elaine Parker.
And it's time for another episode of Main Street Matters,
America's small business megaphone. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Main Street Matters, America's small business megaphone. I'm Elaine Parker with the Job Creators Network. Todd Ricketts is the co-owner of the Chicago Cubs, has stepped beyond sports and into the tech arena with FreeSpoke, a search engine designed to challenge big tech by prioritizing transparency and user privacy. Today, he's joining us to discuss how FreeSpoke works and why it matters for our business climate and consumers, and what it says about the future of information in America. Todd, welcome to Main Street Matters.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate being here.
Well, it's so interesting. Most people know you from the Chicago Cubs, but what has inspired you to move into the tech space with FreeSpoke?
It was really just a response to seeing how big tech manipulates the narrative of what you see, especially through places like Google and Bing and search engines. And so I really set out to build like the best search engine we could that strips away that bias and takes away this idea of a narrative that leads you down a path towards giving you all the information that's out there and letting you make up your own mind. I always say I have a lot of faith in the American people, and the idea that we need to have this narrative that's driven by the big tech companies that leads people down a path, I think is just wrong. And really, we wanted to restore the promise of the internet, which is opening up people's minds by giving them all the information that's out there. And I think that's really what we've done. Is we have a really strong search engine based on our own technology. We built our own index of the internet, so we're not looking to Bing or Google for the background information we have. And then in the last couple of years, with the onset of AI, we've layered on our own AI large language model that has really been trained to say, give us just the facts, ma'am. And so it's really been trained. We've gone out of our way to train it to make sure that it's just giving information and not giving commentary.
Well, for listeners who haven't tried it yet, what exactly is it, and how is it different from Google? Because obviously, millions and millions of people use Google every day. I've been using FreeSpoke for the last, couple of days in anticipation of this interview. Wanted to try it. I think it's great. I think it's super easy to use. But tell us, kind of what it is.
Yeah, so it's really we're the exact same as Google in the sense that we built an index of the internet, which is the kind of the base of searching for information. Is you have to have a crawler that's out there identifying everything that's sort of new on the internet each day. And then where we differ from Google is how we tag things. So we tag things in a way to highlight information that Google might suppress, and especially if you get into topics like the National Rifle Association, or topics on climate change, or topics on healthcare. Google has a very definitive idea of what they want you to see on those topics. And we kind of come at it from the other direction of not trying to drive you to any particular point of view or any sort of bias, but instead give you all the information that we can on that topic. And that's kind of where it differs. And then, when you kind of jump over to all the new AI driven things like the Claudes and the ChatGPTs, it's the same sort of idea. And those things are great. And we have an AI front end on our search engine too. But they're just looking at another index. They're looking at Bing's index, and then they might be looking at Reddit as well. They might be looking at other places, but they're all kind of starting with that same core of either Google's index or Bing's index when they go looking for information.
I do use ChatGPT often, and I have found that it can be biased because it's pulling from a lot of times biased news sources, and so yeah. I've kind of joked with it, I guess, a little bit to try and see if I could win an argument on economic questions because I've gotten liberal answers from ChatGPT. And so I know it's pulling from a lot of liberal sources, but you're actually labeling the
Yeah.
sources as right, middle, and left. What was that transparency? Why was that so important to build in?
Well, I think that there's oftentimes, if you're reading news specifically, if you're reading news on a particular topic, you kind of want to know the angle that that person who wrote that story is coming from. And so what sort of biases they might have brought with them. So the idea of labeling all these news sources is saying, okay, this is a left-leaning news source. This is a right-leaning news source. This is a middle. This one's in the middle. This one doesn't seem to have a lot of bias. And that just gives you a little bit of context so your brain can be a little more turned on when you're reading that information. And the idea is that like you can see the left, you can see the right, and then you can also see like the overlap, which is what we have in our consensus when you search for something, we pull up you can pull up perspectives. And what that does is it gives you like the perspectives, which is kind of the overlap of what everybody agrees on. And then it gets down to like, well, and then this side believes this and this side believes that. And I've always thought that like coming from like a debating sort of family, the best way to win any sort of debate is to really understand the thinking and the logic of the people you're debating with that disagree with you on these topics so you can understand their arguments. So you can either A, start to agree with them, or B, be able to pick them apart and make them kind of come around to your way of thinking.
We really saw during COVID that I feel like Americans, average, ordinary Americans, woke up to the bias in big tech with suppression of articles, with Facebook, Twitter. But this has been going on a very, very long time. Do you see this as a competitor to Google or just a fundamentally different model?
No, we're definitely a competitor. We're definitely a competitor. We want to get out there and really and be in that same mix with those guys. And I don't even limit it to Google. It's I think you can take it on to the Chat GPTs and the Claudes and the Geminis of the world and how they're presenting information to you. Because just remember that every time you're looking for information, those those platforms, they're looking somewhere. And where are they getting their information from? And if they're getting their information, which is most of the time the traditional platforms that we're all aware of, it's just they're so fast. They'll if you think of AI, it's not different technology in the idea that it's thinking. It's different in how quickly it's doing it, right? So if you think about like your historic sort of legacy sort of search in Google, Google could go search through its index in a particular amount of time. AI is just that accelerated by 1,000 with a little bit of thought about how it puts the language together. It's really great technology, but you have to remember on the back end, it's still looking somewhere. And so if it's looking towards an index that is biased, or if it's looking towards platforms that are biased, the answers you're going to get are biased. And I'm with you, Elaine. I wake up in the middle of the night sometimes, and I'll just go fight with ChatGPT on different topics. One of my favorites is, I one of the very few countries in the world that produces enough energy for itself and enough food for itself is the United States. And so I asked ChatGPT, like, make a list of all the countries that produce enough energy for their population and enough food for their population. And it listed 5 or 6 countries. I think Canada's one of them. I think, Norway is one of them. Sweden's one of them. And the list is pretty short after that. But it did not include the United States. And I kept pressing it. And I'm like, well, why didn't you include the United States? Why didn't you include? And so finally it caved in. It gave me an answer saying like, well, there's inequalities in food distribution in the United States. And I had to say, well, that's not the question I asked you. I asked you, does the United States produce enough food for its population? And that's those sort of that bias. And it's a simple question, right? Like you can look around the world and know pretty quickly who produces enough food for their population, who doesn't, who imports food, who exports it, so on and so forth. But you run into that bias on a regular basis in all of these like platforms and technologies that are out there.
So we're all arguing with ChatGPT now.
Yeah, that's right. It's like the best form of entertainment is like to dig into that left bias of ChatGPT.
Well, I was just so curious because obviously I don't know all the technology behind it, and I wanted to know what kind of bias I was dealing with. And I was actually able to kind of steer it towards my line of thinking in terms of what stimulates the economy more. Would it be uh, welfare to recipients of welfare, or other measures like tax cuts, good policy. Initially, it was talking about the spending that would happen if you're giving people money to go spend. So, I had to really steer it back and keep asking questions and drilling down and drilling down and drilling down. But if I had
Yeah.
taken its initial answer, the spending of the welfare benefits won the day.
Yeah, and like, well, these things are very complicated in their design, but they're also designed to keep you there, right? The whole lot of these technologies, they want to keep you using their product, and so they don't want you to quit entirely. So eventually, they do start to cave a little bit when they listen. It'll listen to what you're saying, and it'll give in a little bit. But yeah, that's really not where they're coming from, and that's not the base of their information.
Right, right, yeah.
And if you think about all the big tech companies that are out in Northern California or on the West Coast in general, they have executives that might be slightly left leaning, but they have programmers that are way left leaning. And then you add into that the amount of content produced just in general. So even if you're just looking at it based on content, 75% of the content that you'll find in these indexes on the internet is left leaning already. So you have the left that's producing so much more content. And then you have the guys that are creating the algorithms that read the content are left leaning as well. And so all of a sudden, even without trying, Google, Bing, Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini, they're going to come up with a left leaning answer, even when they're not trying to.
The left isn't just producing so much more content, they're able to disseminate it through a network so much more than
Yeah.
conservatives do. I mean, they're just it's a system in place. It's a network that is so good at pushing the information out from all areas that, yeah, I can see how AI would look at those indexes and just see such a mass scale that
Yeah.
leans left. Why wouldn't it pull from all of that information? And if you don't know any other point of view already, or you're not coming into it with at least a neutral to center right neutral, you're going to walk away with, well, this is what ChatGPT says, or this is what Gemini says.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah, because those large language models that they like we're talking about, like they do look out. And they're like, okay, well, three-quarters of the stuff I'm finding on this comes from this point of view, and so that must be the point of view that's prevalent, right? So and it is true that like there's just so much more left-leaning content that gets disseminated, and on the left media kind of picks up like narratives from other publications in their world and just goes with them, and so there's a lot of that echo chamber and repetitiveness that happens as well.
Well, I have a pretty independent to maybe slightly center left friend. The older she gets, the more
Yeah, right.
conservative she gets, as we all do.
Yeah, right.
But she's very, very skilled at AI in her job. And so she has stopped listening to news, and she tends to ask these questions to AI. But she doesn't have the, I guess we'll call it industry knowledge or policy knowledge to drill down the way I just described to you that I did.
Hmm.
So she's still only getting sort of that first level. I mean, she's taking the time to research, and I love that because most Americans don't. They see a headline and go with it. But she's taking the time to research. It's just she's pulling from those biased indexes that you were describing. And so I've been talking to her about how I had to drill down so far, and she might not want to just take ChatGPT's first response.
Well, she's a great candidate to become a FreeSpoke user, actually, because when you do a search on any sort of news topics, again, like we get back to these perspectives, we give both sides of the argument, and so you can really kind of see where both sides are coming from, and that's kind of the whole idea is that you go back to like strip out the bias, give people the information, and let them make up their own mind. That's kind of the whole premise of what we built, and I think what we have is really great.
Well, how do you assess the business climate right now for startups like FreeSpoke?
I think in the technology world, it just sort of depends where you're coming from. I'm seeing a lot of startups get funded through these kind of these venture funds. So I think a lot of the if it says AI, they're finding funding. We haven't really been out to market as FreeSpoke. We're privately funded ourselves, but I think that like the world in general it's pretty okay. Can I say that? Is that pretty okay? It's like, I don't think the economy is ripping along like it may have in the past, but I definitely think it's growing, and there's definitely opportunities out there.
Looking ahead, like in the next 3 to 5 years, what do you consider success for FreeSpoke?
Really, I think we just want to get out there to be just a little bit more known. I mean, this is our year. We've been working on this for a few years, but this was the year in 2026 we decided, amongst our little executive team to say like, this is the year we want to start pushing ourselves to get out there and really let the world know that we're here, instead of just the more organic growth that we've been experiencing for the last couple of years.
Well, good. Well, I'd be remiss not to ask you before I let you go about the midterms and kind of the political climate out there. How can Republicans connect the dots between their policy wins and the having an electoral victory in the midterms?
Yeah, it's going to be tough. I mean, this is really every incumbent president in his midterm loses seats. So there's going to have to be a big shift in the thinking. I think a lot of it has to do with what's going to happen in the next few months. Obviously, I don't think the president wanted to go into Iran right now, but felt compelled to. But there has to be some clarity on where that's going to happen. And then I think we also have to get people into this. We just went through tax season. As people start seeing, their tax returns come back and they have the economy growing, I think those are the three things that are going to be super important: is a growing economy, some clarity on Iran, and people starting to get their tax returns back, realizing how much their taxes went down last year.
They're talking about potentially another reconciliation package before the midterms. What are some policies that you think they should be looking at for reconciliation, or just even in policies they should be pursuing right now to help the economy get going?
Yeah, I think in general, it's every time if you think about what your actual tax bill is, it's not just the money you pay in. It's the money you pay in plus the inflation created by the debt spending at our federal level. And so every time we print new money, we make the money in your pocket worth less. And so I think people need to shift their thinking a little bit and stop blaming this like faceless inflation, and say like the federal government is what's creating that inflation, and that's decreasing the value of the money you have. And so that's a tax. That's a tax on your assets that you don't see. And so people really need to be much more conscious of our deficit spending and the amount that we're printing at the federal level. And if people vote with their pocketbooks and say, "Hey, we don't have like a revenue problem with the federal government. We have a spending problem," and the federal government needs to rein itself in. And really, a lot of it is just going after waste, fraud, and abuse. We're seeing a lot of that is coming to light these days. There's a lot of duplication at the federal level. There's like different agencies that are basically doing the same thing. And so I think if we have, I don't know if it's like Doge is the right word, or that Doge is the right place to address it, but just really streamlining our government and getting rid of the bureaucracy.
I couldn't agree more. It's kind of always laughable when they do talk about spending cuts. They're really just talking about the cutting the rate of increase
Yes.
in the budget, and there's never actually any real spending cuts, and yet they're still going to increase the budget. And you see politicians running around like chickens with their head cut off, like the sky is about to fall because they're going to not increase spending as
Yeah.
much as they would like.
Well, that's why you always have to appreciate a president and a Congress that lowered taxes last year, right? Because I always have this view that the only way you can truly keep the government responsible is to starve it, right? Give it as little as you can and force them to be as responsible as they can with what you give.
I couldn't agree more. Well, Todd, before we let you go, where can audiences find FreeSpoke?
So you can just go to freespoke.com, or you can go to the App Store on your iPhone, and or the Google Play Store, and really download the app, which it give you a good access through your phone all the time.
Well, I encourage everyone to go and download FreeSpoke and give it a try. Todd, thank you so much for joining us. This has been such a fascinating conversation and about FreeSpoke and new search engine that folks can try. Thanks so much for joining us today.
No, thanks for having me. Really, really appreciate it.
Well, and thank you all for tuning in. Main Street Matters is part of the Salem Podcast Network. New episodes debut every Wednesday and Friday. You can subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast from, and we'll be back soon with another episode.